Gentlemen, I will give you a brief rundown on our present status in Vietnam, together with a thumbnail sketch of the initial landings and subsequent buildup.
We got there in October of 1967. We were there through the Tet Offensive, of course, and I was sent out of country in September of '68, and the squadron came out about a week or two later. Our coordination with the ground forces, which is our job to support, was just abysmal. I can recall one mission that will never leave my mind. When we were watching a ground force, a platoon, attack a house that was full of enemy, and we let them know that we could destroy that house. We could take care of this for you. And they were more interested in doing it themselves. That lack of cooperation and that risk of Marine lives left a real lasting impression on me. In the times that I flew, I had such little contact with the people we were assisting, the people on the ground, except through an airborne FAC or an occasional FAC on the ground. It was really hard to know if we were doing a good job and if we were using our aviation forces properly.
We can't repeat the mistakes that we had in Vietnam. We need to have people trained in doing what they were going to do when they went into warfare. They needed to talk to the ground units. The ground units and aviation units needed to train together so that they went in as a coordinated force, which was a Marine Corps doctrine but never taught. There was no technique. Nobody was trained to do things like that. The pilots didn't understand, and there was no effort. They didn't understand it. They just didn't know how to do it. And they didn't want to do what they were briefed to do because it was kind of foreign to them. I had the pleasure of being transferred to Khe Sanh, which was under siege at that time, and running the airfield. Khe Sanh was supplied totally by air, either airdrops or an extraction system where a plane will land on the runway and dump the load on the runway. And we kept the airfield operating 24 hours a day, in spite of all the enemy fire that we were getting. We were dropping bombs, which fighter pilots hadn't been dropping bombs until then. The majority of aircraft that got shot down, the pilots weren't well schooled in how to take evasive maneuvering during their attack. There was something lacking in basic training because no one understood the mission. At that time, it was obvious to me that the Marine Corps helicopter pilots were being trained to do the Navy helicopter pilots' mission, which is anti-submarine warfare. They had no training for low-altitude navigation, no training for flying visually at night, no training for simulated deployment of ground troops. Tried to talk to the Navy into putting some kind of Marine mission-oriented training in the basic flight school. It wasn't working, they wouldn't do it.
Virtual elimination of organized combat capability.
We had brainstormed what we thought would improve aircrew readiness the most, and Lop and I came up with the theory of moving the MAWTS, Marine Aviation Weapons Training Units, one on each coast, to Yuma to form one squadron to train everybody and standardize training across the Marine Corps, and combining the MAWTS into MAWTS into one organization, and putting that one organization here at Yuma was brilliant.
At that time, Howard de Castro was wandering around headquarters on one of his training soirees, and I asked him to sit on the conference and let's start talking about what we can do.
There were people at headquarters Marine Corps who were engaged in making aviation better. There were people on the East Coast, people on the West Coast, probably in Hawaii, everywhere. But there were a group of us at El Toro and Yuma who had flown together in Vietnam and had known each other for a long time. And under Bob Norton, who was the commanding officer at that time of MCC RTG-10 at Yuma, the training group, he kind of gave us license to support what had come out as Project 19. So we read it, and it said they were thinking that maybe they could do more with the MAWTS. So we put together a concept, and I gave the brief, and it was not well received. The other folks, the F4 and the A4 people, were upset because we wanted to include helicopters and C-130s. We wanted it to be across the board in aviation. And there was a real pushback that people were afraid we would water down the current MAWTS-2 training for F4 and A4. And at the end of the conference, there was no agreement to go forward from that conference.
Well, we said we needed to respond, and we needed to have an organization that would make sure that the entire Marine Corps was included, and it wasn't just going to be the fighter club of the MAWTS, but it was going to include everyone.
At 3 o'clock in the afternoon on a Friday, all the folks had to go home except Don Gillum and those of us who were stationed at El Toro and Yuma. So we went over to the club with Don Gillum, rewrote the message, and said that we were in agreement that this is a right concept and should go forward. And that is really not what came out of the conference. But we wrote a message that said it was. The message went out from FMF PAC back to headquarters with the agreement that we should continue.
And so this group of the sterling young men, they were majors, lieutenant colonels, started coming up with ideas. And at that time, our model was the Top Gun School for the Navy, where they had taught tactics and things that they would do, and then pilots would go home and bring their airplane back and have a live exercise of what they were doing. And so someone came up with the idea and said, why don't we do that? And kind of roughed out a syllabus that would include coordination of with the ground troops, using helicopters, escorted if necessary, getting support from fixed-wing aircraft, with all pilots being taught how to use their aircraft in support of the ground troops.
One of the key things in starting the organization was to make sure that everybody who came to MAWTS realized that the best thing we could possibly do was make squadrons better than they were. That if we could do it well enough, we might even be able to do away with MAWTS. Because MAWTS doesn't fight wars, squadrons fight wars. And the first thing I heard from some of the pilots was, okay, we need to get special flight suits. We're gonna, like the Blue Angels or like the Top Gun guys or something. I said, no, we aren't. We are supporting the Fleet Marine Force, and we're gonna look just like them. And you need to remember, they're the guys that are gonna go to war. You guys are gonna make it better. So we tried really, really hard to keep a low profile, low key approach.
After the course had run once or twice, I got a call from Howard saying that he had had the artillery people wanted to go to our school, and that the Navy had wanted to go to the school. Could we let them go? And I said, absolutely. And just plan on it, and plan on, if we can handle the course load, we'll let anybody go to it that wants to go to it. Several years later, I called on Rich Herney, who was the assistant commandant, and this was after Desert Storm, and I was working in town then, and so I dropped in and asked him if he was satisfied that the attack in Iraq at that time had washed out all the mistakes that were made in Vietnam, and it was run the way it's supposed to be run rather than the way it always had been run. And he said, absolutely. We went in there trained knowing what is supposed to be done. people were skilled in planning, and they knew what they had to do to be successful. And it was clear to me, although he didn't mention it at the time, it was clear to me it was one of the reasons was because of MAWTS.
Part of why it became what it became, I think, was because we got the helicopter squadron COs involved. And we did that by rotating from a CO being a jet pilot to a CO being a helicopter pilot. And that was a hard sell. My boss was Major General Day. I went back and talked to him and told him that you know, the helicopter pilots won't listen to me. They said, Butcher, I know we need to train. I know we need to train more realistically. I know that we need to make our students that come to WTI ready to come. But you don't understand. We don't have time. So I said, you know, you're a jet pilot. You just don't understand. And so General White agreed with me. He called down to the colonel's monitor and he said, give Colonel Butcher his pick of any colonel who's due to move next year. That's how helicopter pilots got involved with MAWTS-1. It was the right thing to do, and it's the only way that we got the helicopter guys to listen to us. I'm not sure they totally listen to us anymore all the time anyway, but at least they're much better about it than they used to be.
I think, you know, the MAGTF is the glue of the Marine Corps, and it's what makes us unique, what makes us successful. I think for certainly the helicopter community, when this came in and the great leaders that were here before me, we certainly instilled that, because there really wasn't anything else like that. The Army didn't have anything like that. Certainly the Navy and Air Force and Army kind of glammed onto what we were doing. So we were, and then adding the command and the control, and adding the aviation logistics, adding, you know, artillery, you know, batteries to be able to fire, to do those things, getting in all the joint assets we can get in. All those things are extremely valuable because they show you a replication of what you might see in different conflicts when you bring the joint community together. I certainly think that's one of the challenges that I probably assume they still face today. How do you, for threats, for blue forces, for everything else, how do you replicate that and get people to want to do that training? And I think that's the hard part. I think there's been multiple models tried, but I think it'll continue to be a challenge. I think the other thing is that a lot of the instructors don't realize is how valuable they are when they walk out of here, because they do understand a larger part of the MAGTF for their rank. And so we need to make sure they get put in positions or in operational places where they can use that influence to be able to do what they need to do to continue forward.
So in 2010, I showed up as the Group OPSO in Afghanistan. And the way the airspace was designed and some of the political implications, the British had been assigned their own airspace. It was causing a lot of issues. When we showed up, we identified it as like, hey, this has to change. Like, they've got this tiny bit of airspace right next to the airfield, right next to ours. The coordination is killing us. It's causing safety of flight issues, but there's some political implications. So, you know, how are we going to do this? Like, we need to reach out to the brigade and figure out what are we going to do. So we reached out to the brigade, and sure enough, Al Walton, who's a former WTI instructor, British guy on staff here, was their air officer. So, hey Al, it was great. I mean, at the end of the day, it's all about people, right? So we talked to Al, and we sat down and we sat in front of a whiteboard for hours, and we finally had our aha moment. And through the course of a couple months and working it through, we're able to truly create a seamless airspace with buy-in from the Brits, with Marine Corps leadership, that eventually made for a much safer environment for pilots to do their job in Afghanistan. But if we didn't have pre-existing relationships, if I didn't know Al, if he didn't understand Marine doctrine and what we were capable of doing, because he was the one who had to convince the British that to bring Marines into their system to clear their fires. Without that, it never would have happened. So that's a very concrete example of, you know, relationships developed here that pay off 5, 6, 7 years down the road.
You know, if you're in the other services, Brand X, and you're in the Air Force, you're F-16 guy, you're an F-16 guy. You know, you're a Marine, you better know it all. You better know how to use every aircraft. You better know whether you want to put them on strip alert or put them airborne. You know they got to have tanker support, you understand command and control. So I just think it really helped me be a complete MAGTF officer and a complete joint officer. As for being a general officer and later a MEF commander, to really understanding, okay, how do you fight something this big? So you take the building blocks you learned as a student here, and then as, you know, instructor except for me, and then as, you know, a CO here, and then in my combat time, and whether it's in the battle captain position with 3rd MAW or it's in the KOC, and you end up with a pretty good idea of what works and what doesn't work, where a lot of people just only have a single dimension on that view instead of a broader view which Marines bring to the fight.
As we continue to go with the technologies that are coming, so every platform in the next 20 years will be on some network of some sort. Every aircraft, manned and unmanned, will have to be integrated so that their information is available and being utilized appropriately with limited assets. There's always limited assets. There's always more targets than you have bombs for. There's always more requests than you have aircraft for. And WTIs are going to have to ensure that we're training to the right readiness level for those Marines as evolving technologies make the battle space smaller but bigger at the same time.
One of the just the wonderful things about MAWTS-1 is the innovation is continuous here. Every CO and every staff that's here is just in a constant, almost like circular cycle of innovation, where we are constantly assessing how the environment that we're fighting in is changing, and we are assessing how technology is enabling us to do different things. And then we are adopting those technological advances to try to come up with better, more lethal, more precise, and less risky ways to fight those threats that are out there. We're trying to create the kind of contested and degraded environment out here in Yuma that we think we're going to see in the future. When you look across the Marine Corps at the other communities, almost everyone is trying to emulate what we're doing here at MAWTS-1.
I look at my experience at MAWTS-1, and you know, the Marine Corps calls Quantico the crossroads of the Marine Corps, and it occurred to me that, you know, MAWTS-1 is a crossroads of marine aviation. Our mission is strategic. It gives our leadership a venue to find quick solutions to problems, and the unique way we execute out here with the fleet support, it keeps everybody tied in. It's a vital piece of marine aviation, and I think the future's bright for MAWTS-1. It's going to be around for another 40 years, and you know, the sky is the limit for what we see happening here in Yuma and with MAWTS-1. We work hard at MAWTS. It's challenging at times, and we spend our days working on the hard stuff, and we go home to our families and complain about what we're having to do. But once you're removed from it and move away, you know, you'll only remember the great things and the exposure to the fantastic people, the fantastic mission, and kind of getting inspired every day by what the Marines here do, and frankly what the Marines from the fleet come in here and do. It's a great experience. Wouldn't change a thing. Wouldn't, you know? I've said, you know, I'm coming to an end in my career, and you know, I've been probably one of the luckiest Marine aviators ever to serve. I've had a great opportunity.
MAWTS is an incredible organization, and it's unbelievable what it has become from what it was back then. We had no idea. We had thoughts, we had dreams, and we thought it could be good. But I think DeCastro will tell you the same thing. Neither one of us thought it would be what it is.
I have to tell you, we were grinding to make it as good as we could at the time. But it makes perfect sense to me that MAWTS has grown with the capabilities of the Marine Corps and has assisted in improving capabilities, not just from a training perspective, but from a design perspective, and telling people what we need and helping bring it on board. So MAWTS has gone way beyond the initial concept and all in the right direction, I think.